Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Evgeny Likhoded. Evgeny is a CEO and founder of ClauseMatch, which provides financial institutions with a modern compliance platform to transform their regulatory change management process. Evgeny, can you tell me a short story about ClauseMatch and why there was a need for your solution?
Well, Boris, the short story about ClauseMatch is we started ClauseMatch as a platform which would allow employees, allow people in compliance to work in a modern way on compliance documentation. And what I mean by compliance documentation is the process of creating a policy document which is compliant with a regulation and communicating that policy document to employees is actually an extremely complex process within an organization. And given that there are a lot of regulatory changes which are happening all the time on a constant basis in relation to banks, there needed to be a central platform which would allow to manage that regulatory change process, creation of policies and procedures which are compliant, and then communicating them to employees in order to show to the regulator that they've addressed the obligations imposed on them end to end.
All right. So, can you explain what ClauseMatch offers to industry, how it differs from other compliance software providers, and what are some examples of your customers' user cases?
So I'll give you an example of number of banks and how they use the platform today. So the primary central point for us when we start working with organizations is we help to centralize the policy management lifecycle and bring it to the highest maturity level of managing policies in a centralized way, communicating them to employees, keeping the audit trail of every change, every decision, every approval made on every policy change, and then mapping those changes to regulatory obligations which are applicable to the bank. So essentially, what they end up with is a modern platform to manage policies in real time. Every update is tracked, every comment, every change is tracked, and then mapping at a very granular level down to a paragraph in that policy to a specific obligation in a regulation or an interpretation of that regulation by the bank at a granular level as well. So essentially our clients end up with a picture where they have all of the regulatory obligations documented and managed, all of the regulatory alerts managed as well in relation to regulations. And all of them are mapped to the policies and procedures which are always up to date and then communicated to employees.
All right, yeah. So on your website, I saw a very nice reference from Barclays. ClauseMatch helped us tackle challenges which a major GRC vendor we worked with couldn't overcome. First of all, my congratulations on that nice note. And we have spoken to many GRC vendors during these years, and I wonder whether you can share with us some examples of what worked for you guys as opposed to this established GRC vendors in this particular example.
Well, one thing which always works for us is we use modern technologies which provide real-time collaboration, and especially in today's world, especially now when people are working remote, when people are working from different places, it's important for the platform to provide a way to collaborate in real time, to be updated and to see the single version of the truth of the document, for example, that they're working on. And you don't see those types of technologies used by incumbents. I think the second part is the use of artificial intelligence in the product. Because if you try to think about how many regulatory obligations I have as a global bank, how many policies and procedures I have, and how many controls I have in the risk system, it becomes and the relationships between them. There are millions of relationships that potentially can be there, and it's impossible for a person to or for a department to actually manage them in a dynamic way. So artificial intelligence helps there. And then I think the final point is, our typical implementation, a global rollout for a major global bank takes, months, not years. It takes 4 to 6 months to actually from the signature of the contract to a BAU. And that is a significant advantage over the incumbent vendors, as we've seen.
All right. All right. So we are currently in the midst of the major crisis, the most disruptive period to our society in the peacetime history. And the impact on the public and the healthcare system has been devastating. And our economy is facing the prospect of a recession much deeper than and more painful than was in the crash of 2008. What do you see as the biggest challenge for compliance and risk managers during this time?
Well, I think this time is extremely challenging, and I think it hit all of us, not just from the company's point of view, but also personally. And it is definitely a difficult time. Um, but in terms of just challenges in compliance and that we have seen so far, one is the pace of change and the pace of having to make those changes internally on business continuity plans, on resilience plans, coming back to work plans. We have to start thinking about those as well. They are now changing daily, and given that global banks and global organizations have uh, impacts in every country which are affecting them differently, it's very difficult to keep track of them, but also to communicate to employees in those countries what they're supposed to do. And it's challenging uh, to keep pace with these changes. So that's one challenge that we've seen. The second challenge is simply, compliance officers didn't have tools traditionally, and now everyone is going remote, and without any tools which helps them to centralize that communication between them when they're working, when they're coming up with content, when they're doing tasks, it's challenging to keep track of who's doing what, and the flow of the communication. So that's the second challenge we've seen. And the third challenge, those organizations who didn't have a full work from home strategy now have to accelerate all the projects that are in communications domain, that are in collaboration domain. And uh, I think a lot of organizations are finding that, for example, implementation of those projects cannot be accelerated because suddenly companies that provide communication services, provide collaboration services, they're doing implementations for every organization out there now, and they don't have resources to do that.
Yeah, yeah. To continue with your observation, I think that the digitalization of compliance and risk was a major trend even before the COVID crisis. And what we see now is the trend is just accelerating during the crisis. And people are working from home, organizations become more decentralized in their locations, and how they serve their customers, the rising pace and scope of policy compliance and procedure changes happening daily or weekly. So risk and compliance issues become very important. Can you share with us what you see on your site about this trend? What are your tips, some of your tips for risk managers to stay the course?
Well, I think we have definitely seen acceleration of digitalization initiatives within organizations. So while we have seen a lot of software vendors had their projects delayed or canceled, we actually had a number of clients which are accelerating the implementation. And I would say, right now, any idea is a good idea. There are no bad ideas in crisis because anything is better than staying frozen. That's one thing. And the other thing is, bringing innovation at a much faster pace. Thinking about new business models, reinventing products and services, or just reinventing processes. This is the time when big leaps are made. And actually, all of the successful companies of today have done that in the last crisis. They have doubled down on innovation. They have reimagined how they do things, and they have implemented a different way of working.
Okay, maybe last question, something related to our community. What do you think? How we at global risk community can contribute to the process of better understanding of this complex world of risk?
I think there could be a lot more collaboration within the industry. And what I mean by collaboration is we're advocating for regulators to collaborate and for regulators to have a different way of working as well, and different way of publishing rules and updating all of the regulated market participants. But I think there could be a lot more collaboration within the industry between risk and compliance professionals as well, in terms of creating more innovation on data sharing, which is not competitive for banks in risk and compliance area, for using AI and train models on a much bigger data set between those institutions. Because I think I've got a theory that if we had all of the regulatory documents in one place, and we had all of the controls in one place, and all of the policies and procedures in one place, and compared them between all of the organizations, and run artificial intelligence and natural language processing on top of this data set, we could very quickly train a model which would be able to identify gaps and actually suggest what does compliance look like with a particular regulatory document. But in today's world, without a massive collaboration push, I think it's pretty much impossible to do.
All right, thank you. Thank you. It was a very special interview, and very interesting about your perspective. So I wish you a great success with your future growth plans, and I hope that our members will find this interview very useful.
Great. Thank you very much, Boris.
Thank you.